right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I'll be your host for today. And here we are. We are in the home stretch to the Christmas holidays. We have 5 more days to go before we wrap things up for 2023. But we do still have a few more events to come. We have an amazing ocean event today with ECOP Canada. And then on Thursday, we will have a Darwin 200 event where we'll catch up to the Darwin 200 and the Oosterschelde as they sail towards the Falklands, which is their next destination. All right, well, let's get right into it. Before we do, though, I want to give a shout out to the classes who are already starting to say hi in the YouTube chat. I can see we've got Miss Evans' crew hanging out in Oregon. Looks like we've got Miss Fuller's crew saying hi in Michigan, another class saying hi in Toronto. So use that chat sidebar. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And then when the Q&A time comes, be sure to send us in some questions there as well. So today's event, we this year have teamed up with the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition for a series of live events, bringing together a dynamic team of early career ocean professionals, or ECOP, as you heard me mention it before. These individuals are from across Canada and around the world, and they are sharing with students their personal stories of what ignited their passion for the ocean and how they embarked on their career paths. So joining us today is Aneri Garg. She is a marine ecologist, a science communicator, artist, and entrepreneur living on the west coast of Vancouver Island. She's an advocate for inclusion, equity, justice, and accessibility for all in ocean spaces, and she uses her passion for the ocean to share stories about her research and coral reef restoration. So I'm going to grab Aneri right now. We'll bring her in from backstage. Hey, Aneri, how you doing?
Hey, nice to see you. I'm great. How are you?
Excellent. It's great to have you joining us. I'm here close to Toronto, so we've got you coming in all the way from the West Coast. It's great to have you today.
Yep, coast to coast to coast.
Excellent. Well, we've got a great group who are joining us today. More will be tuning in later this week via the YouTube recording as well. But we are excited to get to know you a little bit. We'll play some Kahoot afterwards, and then we'll get to a little Q&A action.
That sounds wonderful. Thanks for having me here. And I'm so excited to hear that there's folks inland in the States, in Canada. I'm so excited to share a little bit about coral reefs with you all today, a little bit about my research, and then hear all your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and present, and I'm going to share a little bit about my research on coral reefs. Boop, show you some cool photos. Here we go. All right, are we all good here?
Looks good.
Awesome. So we're going to dive right in and start with a little game today. If you're joining from your home or a classroom, it's a bit of a true and false game. So I'm going to put a statement up on the slide. You're going to stick your hand out. And you're going to go thumbs up for true, thumbs down for false. All right, let's go with the first one. The longest mountain range is on land. So your thumb is out, up if it's true, down if it's false. Take a sec to think about it. Maybe you're thinking about some of the mountains you've seen or the pictures of mountains you've seen. All right, once you have your answer ready, let's do a reveal. 1, 2, 3, go. False. It's actually the Mid-Atlantic Ocean Range, and this is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean between the continents of Africa, South America, North America, and Europe. And you can see that in the light blue line on this slide. All right, let's try another one. We're getting into our ocean space here, ocean mind. Most of the oxygen produced on Earth comes from the rainforests. All right, take a second. You can get your hand out. Thumb up for true, thumb down for false. All right, let's do 3, 2, 1. Get your answer up. False. More than half of the oxygen produced on Earth is actually done by these tiny little plants in the ocean called phytoplankton. So this is a photo of one of those plants under a microscope. So it sounds like we have folks joining from all over North America. And I just wanted to share with you that where I grew up in Treaty 1 and Treaty 6 territories, or what we call colonially Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, is very far from the ocean. But I still got really interested in water, in rivers, and lakes when I was in school as well, exploring by canoe or even just walking around in the river valley. And now where I live on the very west coast, it's in Huu-ay-aht First Nations territory. And it's such a privilege to be able to live here, work here, and get to know the ecosystems in my own backyard now. So we're going to dive in. We're going to go a little bit further south to the Atlantic and Caribbean and talk a bit about coral restoration. Okay, so maybe you've seen Finding Nemo, maybe you haven't. It's a story about a fish. And as you can see here, this is a coral reef. So this is a type of ecosystem on our planet, just like forests or grasslands or kelp forests if you're on the west coast of North America. And so this is a place where animals and plants live and interact underwater. And just like ecosystems on land, all of these species are interdependent with each other. So the secondary consumers, maybe carnivores like sharks or different types of fishes, they also rely on different types of fishes, but even the coral themselves that live there. You might see some really fun animals here. There's a clownfish, there's a turtle, there's a jellyfish. And so all of these animals are together on a coral reef. And even though they look a bit like plants, corals are actually animals. If you look on the right side, there's a picture of an anatomy of a coral polyp. You can imagine a jellyfish swimming around and you flip it upside down, and that's a coral, and they're in the same family. And they form the massive amount of habitat and places where fishes and other animals live on coral reefs. And we already know that these are really important ecosystems with plants and animals, but we're getting more and more concerned. All of these plants and animals, as the water is heating up, are actually threatened because of climate change, increased air temperatures, and increased ocean temperatures around the world. And what this means is all those little coral habitats, less and less of them are available to all the animals we love to see, like turtles and lobsters and dolphins and fish on these reefs. Okay, but why do we really care about fish? I mean, we know they look pretty, we know they taste really good, but they're really important to the corals themselves. So even though corals give fish somewhere to live, the fish also provide things like nutrients to the coral reefs. So what we're finding is, this is a little bit of a video of what's happening. This is called coral bleaching. So as the waters warm up, all the beautiful colors and the actual animal itself starts to die and leaves behind this white skeleton of a coral that's dead. And what we want is a thriving coral reef where we see many different kinds of species of coral and of fishes. All right, so we got this really big problem. What are we going to do about it? Well, one of the ways that people are trying to approach this is called coral restoration. And it's kind of like tree planting. Maybe you've heard about a forest that's lost a bunch of trees. So folks are taking saplings and planting them in the ground to create more of that really important habitat for fishes. So there's organizations all around the world that are doing coral restoration, experimenting with the best ways to do it, experimenting with how this actually influences the whole ecosystem. And the aspect that I'm really interested in, like I was saying before, are fishes. And I love tropical fishes. They are really cool little animals. And it shows when you look at all the little baby fish that are coming to a coral reef, it actually really strongly influences the adult fish that are also living in the reef. And you can see through this loop here on the right, the fishes help the coral and the coral help the fish. So as I was thinking about how to research this, I pretended I was a fish. And I had to ask myself, what are some of the things a fish might like in its habitat? Maybe can you think of things in your own home that make it a good habitat for you? Maybe somewhere to sleep. Maybe your favorite food is around. Maybe you have video games. Now, I can't say that scientists have found that fish play video games, but maybe they like to play in their habitat. Okay, so we know that we're looking at fish and we know that they rely on coral. And if you were a fish, what is it about the coral itself that makes it a good place to live? Is it the shape of the coral, or is it what it's what's made out of, the actual living tissue? So if you take your hands, stretch them out in front of you, try and make a little coral shape with your hands. See all these little pointy fingers and projections? Can you imagine a little fish living somewhere in this coral? So for the experiment I wanted to design, I wanted to try and make coral reefs out of something that wasn't a living coral, so an artificial coral. But I really wanted it to look like a coral reef, have the same shape, have the same size, and as much as possible, have the same color. All right, now, what an endeavor this was. And what I'm about to show you, there's a lot happening here. I was really lucky. At the university I was going to, they had engineers, they had artists, they had paleontologists, so people who studied dinosaurs. And I went and I talked to all these people, and I got to go and ask, okay, how do you make, little modules? If you're an artist, how do you make a sculpture? If you're an engineer, how do you make something look really detailed? And I was super lucky to experiment with 3D scanning and 3D printing using an actual coral skeleton. And the moment of eureka I had was when I was talking to somebody who studies dinosaurs, and they make these little beautiful trilobite molds. You can think of it almost like an ice cube tray. You put your water in, it freezes, and then you can pop out an ice cube. So I got to work. I said, all right, here we go. We're going to try and make an artificial coral here. And we're going to use 3D scanning. So I got to try and use different 3D scanners around campus. And then after that, using your scan, you can actually try and experiment with 3D printing. So I got to try using different 3D printers, seeing how it can really replicate that shape of the coral I was talking about that's so important. On the left, there's a laser printer, and on the right, this is more of a printer that works like a hot glue gun. It just lays down the plastic in the shape you want, layer by layer. But I definitely didn't want to put these right into the ocean. We have enough plastic in the ocean as it is. So I used those 3D printed corals to make molds, learning from some of the artists in my community. So you can make these little stretchy, almost like ice cube trays, and pour it over these corals so that you get a little bit of a negative space. And then I can use concrete to cast them into those areas and assemble a little tripod coral, really similar to how they put corals out on a coral reef. And as you can see here, once all those corals were made, I had a lot of help from the Coral Restoration Foundation in the Florida Keys. That's where we did this research. And we put the living coral and the artificial coral out onto a reef to try and see which fishes are going to come and use those little habitats. So these are a few photos from that time. You clear a little patch on the reef, and then you can essentially use like a Play-Doh material that's really sticky and stick it onto the reef. And then that's how they grow. And this is one of the methods that people use to actually restore coral reefs, by putting these little fragments of coral out onto the reef. So this is an example of one of those experimental plots that I designed, where there's 10 of these corals, and some of them are living and some of them are fake, but to a fish, they all sort of look like a coral reef. And then me and the rest of the team, we came back for many months after we put them out, and using scuba diving, we went on each of these little experimental plots and we recorded which fishes are there, what time are they there, what is it that they like about these habitat patches. And as you can see, the Florida Keys is a bit warmer compared to some of the diving you may have seen up north. We did not have to wear dry suits, but wetsuits, and we didn't have to wear gloves, so our hands stayed warm. Here are some of the photos of fishes that were starting to come and be curious about these little habitat patches. And then this is a video of some of the fishes that were starting to come and use this habitat space as well. Here, I'll fast forward it a bit. Let's see if you can count how many different types of fish you see just in this video. I saw maybe 3 or 4, but I'd be curious to hear what you saw. All right, so what did we see? And maybe in your science classes, you're learning how to make graphs, how to make charts. This is just a really quick example of some of the things that we saw when we actually went back and looked at the data, or what we recorded when we went back to those reefs. And it was actually really surprising to us. We saw more fishes in the reefs that were fully artificial and more fishes at the reefs that were all living. But what does this actually mean? Well, a lot of science is asking questions and getting more questions. So we're digging a little bit more into what the actual implications of this are and asking even more questions now. So we know that on coral reefs, all these little fishes, they really matter. And you might have seen from those videos, there's different shapes, sizes, colors, maybe even different ages of reefs. And on ecosystems like coral reefs, diversity matters. So diversity is having all different kinds of people, or in this case, fishes, together that make a stronger ecosystem. And it's not just what we look like, but maybe how we think, the ideas we have, maybe the cultural contexts we have. Can you think a little bit about your classroom and maybe what kind of aspects of diversity exist in your own classroom? And in ocean sciences, there's a growing recognition that diversity is really important, but it's also just the start. And there's some amazing organizations in the US and in Canada, for example, BWEAMS, Black Women in Ecology, Evolution, and Marine Science. And they're one of the leaders when it comes to justice and equity and diversity in ocean sciences. There's also growing opportunities for people of color POC conference to share their research with each other, or even scientific queries. This was an amazing talk series hosted from the University of Alberta that featured queer and LGBTQ scientists. And even in Canada, Ocean Allies is a growing organization looking at how we can actually include diversity into ocean sciences. And even here at ECOP Canada, that's one of the things that we're thinking about and starting to grow out a little bit more. Because we know that in ocean sciences, everyone matters and everyone's voices really matters together. And just last week, one of the ocean champions when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and justice released this paper called Towards Equity and Justice in Ocean Sciences. So Asha DeVos, in collaboration with many other authors around the world, released a paper on how a healthy ocean is also a just ocean. And that's also for fish, but also for people. And they had some really great ideas on how this actually looks like and works in the ocean sector. Because the science is really cool, but also what's really cool is the people that are in this space. Whether that's science, whether that's storytelling, or even science communication. And that's one of the ways that I've also been thinking, and many other people have been thinking, about how to make science accessible to different people. Maybe in your classroom, you're somebody that learns better when you're painting or when you're drawing, or maybe you learn better when you're making a graph or writing something out, or a bit of both. So science communication is one way to think about how to make science more accessible to different audiences. And these are just a few examples of some of the ways I've been able to do that in my work, either through writing for magazines, through art exhibits, talking to folks like you over Zoom, documentaries, podcasts, posters, or even hosting live talks or talks in my communities where I'm doing this work. So accessibility is such an important part of this piece. And I just wanted to end off and show you some of the amazing species. This is actually closer to where I live now, not in the tropics, but you can see that there's all kinds of cool plants and animals, even in the ecosystems and cold water systems like here. So there's an example of a kelp crab in the middle at the top, an anemone on the top right, some bull kelp on the bottom left, and a cute little lemon nudibranch in the middle there. And I am equally happy in cold waters as I am in warm waters now. And it's important when we're thinking about science happening all over the world to think about scientists as not just people who wear lab coats, right? We know that. Scientists can even be fishers or fishermen, people who are really intimate with the environment around them, indigenous peoples who've been living and knowing these lands and waters since time immemorial. There's so many experts right in the communities that we live in that maybe we don't call scientists, but really act like scientists. So I'm really grateful to the Huu-ay-aht First Nations where I live now and what I've been able to learn about the ecosystems and how they use and manage the beautiful kelp forests and salmon around here, for example. All right, so that was a whirlwind. We went all over the place there. And like I said, scientists aren't just question answers, but they're also question askers. So this is the end of the presentation part of today. And we'll get into a little Kahoot where you can answer some questions.
All right. Aneri, thanks for that great presentation. Really great visuals. It looks like you have a great time out in the fields. You've come up with some really clever ideas to test some of your hypotheses. And then what we also hear a lot from scientists is you go out in the field with 2 or 3 questions and come back with 15 or 20. So it's just part of science.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we are going to play a little Kahoot now. So let me share my screen and we'll get the code up there for our classrooms. Make sure I pick the right one here. All right, here it is. Okay, so you should see it now. If you would like to join us in today's Kahoot, you need to go to kahoot.it, and then it's going to ask you for a PIN number. So 206-2701 is the PIN number that you're going to put in. If you are joining us in a classroom and you have one-to-one tech, maybe you have Chromebooks or tablets, then you can load up at your seat. If not, your teacher could pop this up at the front and you can shout out your answers to him or her. And then if you are at home, maybe you can use that little QR code up at the top, scan it with your tablet, scan it with your phone, and then you should be able to join us that way. So we'll just give a couple seconds here to get a few classroom groups, a few students here with us, and then we will jump live in. So maybe while we're waiting, Aneri, I'd like to, we'll get started with a question here. And maybe you can tell us about some of the places you've been able to dive around the world.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was really lucky and my first diving experience was actually in British Columbia. And it was intense, but it was really fun. So that's where I first learned to dive. And then most of my diving has been in the Atlantic and Caribbean. So in the Bahamas and in the Florida Keys, where I've done most of my research.
Yeah.
And there was one time I was super lucky. I actually got to dive off the coast of Kenya near Mombasa.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we still have some classrooms, some individual students joining as well. So we'll give it maybe another 10 seconds or so and see who gets in here with us. I see a few more classrooms saying hi in the chat, a group in Oshawa, another group in Alberta. If you want to use the chat now as well, any questions that have come to mind, you can start putting those in the chat now, and we'll have them ready for Aneri when we wrap up our Kahoot together. There are, I think I put 5 questions today. There's a little bit of true and false and multiple choice, 20 seconds for each question. The quicker you get your answer in, and if it's right, the more points you're going to get. It doesn't matter how fast you put in the wrong answer. That we got nothing for you with those wrong answers. So take a moment and look at the question and make sure you are choosing the best answer. So here we go. Let's get into it because I don't want to waste too much Q&A time. Let's play a little bit of Kahoot together. So our first question coming up now. We've got 3-second countdown and then we are in. So most of the oxygen produced on Earth comes from the rainforest. What did we learn about that? Is that true or is that false? What did we learn about that today? Got a few more seconds to get your answer locked in, and then we will see what everybody's thinking. right. Oh, a little bit of a split. I think that comes from when I was growing up, we always talked about rainforest, rainforest, rainforest. And it wasn't until kind of more recently when I was in university and in the last few years, people have been talking more about the importance of the ocean and how much oxygen it produces for us. So about, what would you say, Aneri, 2-to-1, the breaths that we take?
Yep. And actually, a lot of the oxygen that's even produced, it's even the animals in the ocean that are using it.
All right. Let's jump to our next question. We'll take a look at our leaderboard on our way through. So the bronze chicken is holding down that top spot. They knew that was false, that most of the oxygen comes from the ocean.
These nicknames are amazing.
Yeah, they're auto-generated because you never know what could be sent in, but there's some great animal names. Fish depend on coral reefs, and coral reefs depend on fish. Is that true, or is that false? Is it just one way? Maybe fish on coral reefs, and the coral reefs don't really care. True or false, fish depend on coral reefs, and coral reefs depend on fish. Oh, good job, crew. Absolutely true. And in our next question, we're going to find out why maybe the coral reefs need those fish around. So let's take a look at our leaderboard. Oops, there we go. And the amusing goat has snagged that top spot. Let's go to our next question. We've got a multiple choice. Fish provide coral with, is it shelter? Is it nutrients? Is it oxygen? Or is it defense? What are fish generally providing coral with? Shelter, nutrients, oxygen, or defense? What did we learn today? We've got about 5 seconds to get that answer in. All right. A little bit of a spread, but most students decided to go with nutrients, which is true. They're waste products. Fish are also messy eaters. Yeah, they are very important for providing those nutrients.
There's a lot of people studying fish pee and fish poo out there and how that affects coral reefs too.
Yeah, one of my favorite statistics or things to think about sand that always kind of freaks students out is that beautiful sand we see on those white sandy beaches has probably passed through a parrotfish.
Yep.
Yeah, so that kind of catches students by surprise when they learn that fact. All right, the rocky lizard is holding down the top spot at the moment. We've got another true and false coming your way. Aneri did everything for her research project on her own. Is that true, or is that false? She did everything for her project on her own, her idea, implemented everything, got in the water, made it all happen, all on her own. Got a couple more seconds to get your answer in. Oh, good job, crew. That is absolutely false. And that's really important thing about science is it's a real teamwork operation. So from coming up with the ideas for the 3D printing and talking to colleagues and seeing what they were doing to working with people out in the field to implement the project, there were lots of people who helped out with the research project. And that's an important part of science too, is working with your colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Rocky Lizard, you've held it for 2 spots. Let's see if you can hold the final question. Another multiple choice coming your way. Diversity in ocean sciences makes it more just, accessible, creating a sense of belonging, or all of the above. So we learned about how important diversity is on a coral reef system, but it's also really important in ocean sciences. So is it one of those 3 answers, or all of the above? All right. Technically, you weren't wrong if you picked A, B, or C, but the best answer there is all of the above, just accessible, and it creates a sense of belonging. All right. Let's take a look at our podium, and then we will shift gears into some Q&A action. So here we go. In 3rd place, we have the Radiant Goat. In 2nd place, we've got the Rocky Lizard sliding to 2nd. That means we have a new leader. 1st place, we have the Rocky Swan. All right, crew. I don't know what it is with rocky animals today. We've had a couple of those come in. Very cool. All right, I'm going to stop that screen share, close down our Kahoot, and we're going to change to some Q&A action. So if you're tuning in via YouTube, I can see there's lots of classes with us right now. use that chat sidebar. Don't be shy and send us some questions. So the first question that I have here in the chat, Aneri, is about coral bleaching. So what is it that makes the coral lose its coloration?
Yeah, totally. Well, although corals are animals, do you remember the photo I showed you of all the little tiny plants, microscopic, that live in the ocean that produces the oxygen? Corals are actually animals that have these little tiny phytoplankton that live inside of them. And that's what helps them get their colors and get extra energy, essentially. So when the corals bleach, they're actually all those little phytoplankton that are dying and leaving the coral. And then the coral cannot produce enough energy to live. So it's this interesting symbiosis between a plant and an animal living together.
All right. So there is a follow-up to this question, and it is, if a coral is bleached, is that it for the coral, or is there a possibility of recovery?
It really depends how far along. It's not really like an on and off that one day it's alive and one day it's fully dead. Usually it's a dying process. So let's say there's a little bit of a spike in water temperatures, but it's not too hot. A coral might start to bleach, but if it cools down again, or if other kind of favorable conditions arise, then the coral might keep living. But let's say the water temperature spikes and then it just keeps getting hotter and keeps getting hotter. There's not that recovery period for a coral to keep that algae, keep those phytoplankton inside its cells. So it kind of depends.
All right. Well, don't be shy, YouTube classes. Keep those questions coming. Here we go with our next one. What's most challenging about the work that you do when you're in the field?
Well, the weather. We can't control the weather. So sometimes there are days where you go out in the field or you look out and there's a big storm, and even though maybe you're itching to go and record new data, you can't. You have to be safe, right? So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge when it comes to marine sciences, specifically in the field, is salt water. Salt, it corrodes metal, it corrodes all kinds of different things. So one thing you have to keep an eye on is just maintaining your equipment, whether that's boat engines or even whatever equipment you're using, like a clipboard. If it has like a metal clamp on it, it might start to rust. So little things like that sometimes you don't think about till you're in the field. But it's always a good opportunity to be resourceful and to plan in advance, of course, as much as you can.
Okay. Another question here for you, and this is kind of in regards to the 3D printing, because I know that was kind of new, maybe a new application. What challenges did you encounter with the printing?
What challenges?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. In this presentation, it makes it look really smooth, but that was months of trial and error. So for example, it starts at the beginning when you're actually making the 3D scan of what you want to print. Let's say like you're making a scan, you get your file ready. And when I say get your file ready, that means actually opening the 3D scanning software, zooming in even to like the very little polyp level and all those little bumps on a coral. And you have to make sure that it's all watertight, essentially. So let's say you have this water bottle and you're making a 3D scan of it, and you zoom in and there's a little gap here. If you try and 3D print that, the printer gets a bit confused if there's that hole. It'll try and go around, it won't fill properly. So sometimes when it comes to 3D printing, you have to just trial and error, try and repeat. One of the things that I was playing around with also is how to actually just orient a print on the actual print surface. So like in one of those videos, you could see that there was a flat surface. And then, like I said, kind of like a hot glue gun, it lays down the base of whatever you're printing. And then each layer subsequently goes higher and higher and higher to build whatever you want to print on there. So let's say your base doesn't go down correctly. Like if this is a little bit warped or something about the temperature isn't right. There's all these little like finicky things you got to keep an eye on. So those were some of the challenges, but it made it exciting to troubleshoot.
All right. We've got a question here from a classroom in Michigan, and they want to know about seeing any rare fish in the field.
Oh, yeah, that's always exciting. And especially for the fellow fish nerds out there, seeing fishes maybe that are either bigger, like sharks, those are also fishes that we recorded on our surveys, or even the really tiny, tiny rare ones. There are hundreds of tropical marine fish species, and I haven't practiced in a little while, so even I think I'd be rusty at it. But once in a while, we'd get a fish, and no one was able to identify what it was. So we always had either little GoPros or cameras with us so we could take a little video, or sometimes while you're underwater on scuba, you could doodle a little picture of the fish, draw maybe something about it that was really iconic, and then we worked as a team. We'd come back after we were done a survey, we'd talk about it, look at guidebooks, and try and identify which fish they were. There were cute little hamlet fishes. Those are ones I really like that we sometimes saw. There were sometimes sleepy nurse sharks that came across our surveys. Those were also really cool.
All right. Very cool. We have a question here from some third graders in Oshawa, and they would like to know, I'm assuming they've seen pictures of bleached reefs where it kind of gets broken and rubbly. So they're wondering if the reefs still provide shelter in that state.
That's a really good question. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this experiment, because we've seen, and there's been evidence that shows that once a coral has bleached, especially like I said, when it's further along, it's really dead, you might see fishes in and out of that space, but they're not really staying and living there. And there's something about a living coral that makes it really enticing for fishes. So no, not really. They don't provide the same kind of habitat experience as a living coral does.
Okay. Follow-up question from our group in Michigan. Do you ever take things like coral or fish, or maybe some of your colleagues, do you ever take them from the wild to study in the lab?
Some scientists do that. I didn't have to do that for my experiments, but you need to get special permission and permits to do that from conservation organizations, whoever's managing that area. So there are certainly some scientists, for example, who've taken corals, brought it to a lab, and they're trying to study, maybe there are some corals that are more resistant to bleaching. So with waters that are getting warmer, maybe some corals are a little bit tougher. There's something about their genetics. And there's even really interesting studies around, can you take that and put it into another coral? For example, if you have a coral that is doing much better when it's bleaching, is there something genetically there that you can introduce to the same species somewhere else that it would also be more resistant to bleaching? So you can. I haven't personally done that, but certainly it's done.
Yeah. And just to kind of put that into context, is it accurate that kind of some of the latest figures say we've lost probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of our coral reef?
A lot. I am not up to date on this year, especially. There was a really big bleaching event that happened, especially in the areas that I was working in, the Florida Keys and the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of coral has been lost. And so even, like I was saying, restoration is one of the ways people are trying to restore reefs, but mitigation is really the biggest thing. So stopping burning fossil fuels, advocating for maybe our governments to stop expanding fossil fuel industries, really cutting back on how much carbon is going in the atmosphere, because that's really the root of the cause here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the Florida Keys, and we interviewed someone recently from NOAA, and they were talking about how global ocean temperatures this year reached the highest, they've ever been. So that does not bode well for our coral reefs, who like that, kind of a range, and that heat kind of leads to those coral bleaching events.
Even in ecosystems maybe a bit closer to home, where it might feel cold to us. So for example, on the Pacific coast, if I go in the ocean, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's freezing. But even little temperature increases here for animals that rely on cool water, those can also be really hard for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question here about sharks. So this student is curious about if there's anything that can eat a shark, but I want to build on the question a little bit. Maybe you can touch as well on are sharks important for coral reefs?
Absolutely. Sharks are super important for coral reefs. They are the reef cleaners. So if there are diseased fish or dead fish, they sort of are like vacuums. They'll sweep over and clean up all the dead stuff, and that keeps a really healthy reef ecosystem. And yes, sometimes sharks are eaten by other sharks, but orcas also eat sharks.
Yeah, absolutely. And like lots of other animals too, they start off smaller, so there's vulnerable stages in their life as well, where other sharks and things like that could potentially be predators.
Absolutely.
All right. So, we got a good feel for your research and where you've gone so far. So what's next? Is there a new plan, adding to the study, making some changes? What comes next?
Yeah, so kind of was like I was talking about, there's more questions that come out from this. So one of the things that I'm now looking at are there different types of fish species? You may remember there's that little graph I showed you where you saw this U shape, where we saw fishes really at the high coral sites and fishes at the sites with the artificial coral. And that was totally unexpected to me. I thought it would be a little bit more like there'd be a lot of fishes at the living coral, and then it would kind of go down in a line to with the artificial coral. So I'm wondering, maybe it's different types of fishes that have characteristics or traits that might be associated with those kinds of habitats. For example, if you're a fish that really likes to be alone as opposed to being in pods, maybe you don't really care what it's made out of. Maybe you just need somewhere to hide because you don't have that protection of a school of fish that can distract or, be harder for a predator to hunt. So those are traits. So trying to understand a little bit more on a finer scale which fishes are using those habitats.
Okay, and so I think we have time to squeeze in maybe one more question, and I always like this one. There's students who are tuning in who might be thinking marine biology could be a career for them. So what advice would you have for them? So most of our students are middle school today. There's a few high school as well. What advice would you give to students thinking about marine biology?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as somebody who didn't grow up on a coast, you can certainly enter marine biology from wherever you live. And whether that be just gaining experience in whatever water systems are in your backyard. If you are next to a lake or a river, all water is connected to the ocean. There's a lot of opportunities, like I was talking about, of diversifying ocean sciences. Historically, it's been a somewhat exclusive field because it can be expensive. You might need a lot of training, but there's more and more organizations that are trying to help younger folks getting into marine biology, including ECOP Canada, who I now work for. So that stands for Early Career Ocean Professionals. So people who are really getting into the ocean industry, whether that's as a marine scientist or maybe something totally different, an engineer. If you're interested more in art, you can still be in the marine sector and maybe creating images talking about like why are corals bleaching using art. So I think it's more so about what do you really like to do and what are you good at, and seeing how that fits into the marine world. If that's science or, even like science communication, talking about science. So I would just say thinking about what you're good at and what you can sort of do in your own backyard for now. And then also just keeping an eye on some of the opportunities that might come your way for training. Those are things that really helped me when I was getting into the field. And even now, I've been in the field for a few years, and there are times where it can be really hard, like any other industry, and it can feel maybe hard to stay or hard to, feel that sense of belonging. But at the end of the day, there's more and more people that want everyone to be welcome and included and celebrated, including in marine sciences. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you brought up so many good points there, particularly that you don't necessarily have to be a scientist to be involved in the marine world. I spent several weeks on an ocean vessel. We were doing deep sea or sea research, and there was engineers, there were navigators, there was science communicators, artists, there was the cook who had to, cook the food for everybody. Very, very important job on a research vessel. And the ROV pilot. So if you like video games, being an ROV pilot is very similar to kind of maneuvering around and steering around in one of your video games. So that's a transferable skill. So I think that's such an important point.
Yeah, absolutely. Even there's a lot of maybe marine scientists that prefer to do less field work and more like coding work, for example. So like computer engineers, software people. Again, finding what's something that you like and that you're good at.
All right. Well, I want to start off with, you mentioned ECOP, which is really good because obviously we're featuring all kinds of amazing early career ocean professionals. So if you go back in time, you can find some of the events we already have done. We have our next event scheduled for the new year as well. So if you want to explore, you can visit exploringbytheseat.com/ECOP and you can find the event coming up. And I believe we have the recordings up there of the past events as well. I want to give a huge shout out to our classrooms. Thank you so much for playing Kahoot with us. Thank you for sending in all of those amazing questions. And Aneri, it was so great to spend some time with you and explore not only coral reefs and the importance they play with diversity, but also the importance that diversity plays in ocean careers just in general, in ocean sciences. So 2 very important messages to take away today.
There's a lot we can learn from nature.
Absolutely. All right.
Thank you so much, and great job to all the classrooms playing Kahoots. I was very impressed.
All right. Very cool. Well, enjoy the rest of your week, classrooms. Have a great holiday season if you won't be with us before the end of the week. And we hope to see everybody back in 2024. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.